This is one of the more important videos that I'm going to be making. It's about the issue of happiness. Now, in the Western democracies, the idea of pursuing happiness is ingrained. I mean, it's written out in the Declaration of Independence. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And it is considered one of the highest ideals of Western civilization. Capitalism, or at least the neoliberal, corporatist capitalism that we currently live under. Well, capitalism also espouses the pursuit of happiness. The pursuit of happiness by way of buying or acquiring or purchasing goods and services and a lifestyle that will make you happy. And that's supposed to be the goal of life. The pursuit of happiness, finding it like a destination, like a garage, like a car garage, right? You're driving around in the car of your life, and you finally arrive at happiness. It's like a place. It's like a nirvana, like a Xanadu, like something like that. The pursuit of happiness as an ideal has given us a very warped perception of what happiness really is. Because think about it. If you're pursuing happiness and you can find happiness by acquiring things, by acquiring a lifestyle, by acquiring experiences, well, that quickly devolves into hedonism, if you think about it. I mean, just buying things and acquiring things that will make you happy. And so you have to constantly be buying and acquiring more and more things to give you that high of being happy, right? So happiness becomes like this momentary high that you get when you buy something, when you acquire something, when you live a certain way. And you know, when that high fades, you have to up the ante, just like a drug addict. I mean, that's the problem with heroin addicts, right? They take a little bit of heroin the first time and it gives them a big hit. But every subsequent high, they have to take more and more heroin until eventually they OD, right? Or they learn to live without it and they live a kind of like miserable life. So if you look at happiness as a destination, it leads inevitably to hedonism. And hedonism cannot be sustained, just like any kind of drug addiction cannot be sustained. You'll eventually crash. That's the inevitable outcome of trying to pursue happiness in terms of acquiring things. Now, insofar as acquiring people, because a lot of people view the pursuit of happiness as the acquisition of people, of like finding the right friends, of finding the right mate, the right woman. Oh, I'm looking for the perfect woman, and when I find the perfect woman, I'll be happy. Well, the problem with that is that, see, your imagination will always outstrip reality. I mean, right at this second, I can think of the perfect woman. This perfect woman is like, you know, she's a virgin, and yet, you know, under the sheets, she's like this total whore, nympho kind of thing, right? She's like incredibly intelligent and knows everything that I know and perhaps even more things, so that I'm constantly surprised by the things that she knows. And yet she's pleasant and docile and never argues with me, right? She makes the perfect omelet, right? And you know, she's just like, you know, perfect. And if I try to pursue such a woman, I of course will never find her. Because you cannot find the perfect woman, because there's no such person. A perfect woman, that's just a blow-up doll for your imagination. You see what I mean? Perfection, insofar as a woman, insofar as friends are concerned, insofar as the people that you interact with, they are impossible to find. There's no such person. There are only people who are as imperfect as you and I are, and we try to, you know, make the best of what we can with the relationships that we have with them. You see what I'm saying? And so pursuing happiness by way of pursuing the perfect woman or the perfect friends or the perfect social situation of whatever sort you can imagine, that leads to doom and failure as well. Because there is no such perfection, and even if there were, by the very fact of time and how time affects people and how people change over time, that perfection will be momentary and it will be elusive like a mirage. You see what I'm saying? So you can't find happiness by way of things, and you can't find happiness by way of lifestyle, and you can't find happiness by way of people. Well, how do you find happiness? I mean, forget about defining it. Defining it is pretty much impossible. Better minds than yours and mine's combined have failed at the task of defining happiness. You can't really define it, but you can experience it. You can know it. You know it when you experience it, right? And I'll tell you right now, the fact of the matter is that happiness, more often than not, is something you experience along the way towards something else, along the way towards your goals. The happiness that I've experienced in my own life has quite frankly been sort of like almost accidental. You know, I was chugging along in pursuit of an objective that I thought would make me happy, right? I thought that becoming a published author would make me happy. I thought that producing movies and directing movies would make me happy. But oddly enough, it wasn't achieving those goals that made me happy. It was the going to it. It was the trip towards that goal that made me happy. And I didn't even realize it at the time. That was the weirdest thing. And so much of the happiness that I've experienced in my life, the great happiness, and I'll get to the difference between great happinesses and little happinesses. Well, the great happinesses in my life, the great joys of my life, happened sort of like unaware. I was doing something, and it was only retrospectively that I realized how happy it made me, how fulfilled, how fully a man I was in the pursuit of this goal. And I noticed too that the bigger the goal, the greater the happiness. The bigger the goal, the more difficult to achieve, the more happiness I felt along the way, and the more happiness I felt retrospectively. Because that's the weird thing about great joys in your life. You sort of like appreciate them after the fact. For example, when I graduated from college, right? I graduated from college, I moved to Hollywood to try to make it as a screenwriter, and I had, middling success. I was able to option a couple of screenplays, original screenplays that I had written, and it was enough to sort of like get by. But there were days that I didn't have enough money for food. And I'm not kidding. And during those days, I would be, relentlessly working on different projects, trying to make it, and I felt miserable at the time. But retrospectively, those days that were miserable, and I have notes where I talked and wrote about how miserable I was and how desperate and worried and afraid and all the rest of it. Well, retrospectively, those were the best times of my life, the happiest times of my life. It was when the goal was big and the risks were big that I felt true joy, a deep and abiding joy that I could only appreciate after the fact. It's just so weird, but that's life. That's how it is. And often as not, when people aspire to very small goals, very modest goals, their happiness is not very great. When they're trying for something that's very small and reduced and well within the limits of who they are, that is easy for them to achieve, their happiness is not that great. The real happiness you get is when you are really pushing your limits, when you are pushing them with both hands, just shoving at them, shoving at your limits, shoving at them as hard as possible to break through and achieve something great, something that initially you don't even imagine that you could possibly achieve, but by shoving against the limitations of who you are and breaking through those limitations and reaching those goals, you feel this incredible happiness. It is amazing, it is intoxicating, and it is the high point of my life. Those moments, those streaks of happiness that I felt. Yeah, you feel them after the fact, and they are like streaks of paint along the trajectory of your life. You feel them after the fact, and you look back at the times of your life, the years of your life, and there are these green streaks of paint, as if somebody had taken this big broad brush with dripping with green paint and had painted those years, even though those years when you were living them, they were kind of miserable, they were kind of shitty, right? Yeah, at the time they're shitty, but after, it's like some great graffiti artist came along and just splatter this green paint over those years, and it just makes you feel terrific. Yeah. And you look back very, very fondly of those years of struggle and even those years that were a failure. And often as not, you'll find that sometimes the years pass and they're like red years. Years streaked with red, a failure. And then later, those years of failure, you realize and get a different perspective on them, and they give you joy. But you very rarely feel great joy in the moment. It's only after the fact. But those are the great joys, okay? And I have a mental distinction between great joys and little joys. This is informal. This isn't like a strict philosophical distinction, but it's something that I've experienced. And I'm telling you so that you know what to expect. Because you're going to have these little joys, these little happinesses in your life. And these little happinesses will catch you so unaware. And sometimes you're going to be lucky enough to realize them happening as they occur. A great little happiness is, for instance, having a great and profound conversation with a good friend. And just talking with a good friend about things that are important to you and important to him, and helping one another understand the world and understand your lives. This often as not happens when you're young, when you're like a teenager. And a lot of times you'll feel at the moment this little joy, this little happiness of that contact with another. And it'll be just amazing, and you'll know it at the time. Or sometimes you listen to a piece of music that you never heard before, and it moves you so profoundly. I remember very clearly listening to the song Holocene. I forget the name of the band. A great tune, and the first time I heard it, I was so moved by it. It gave me such happiness. That first burst of listening to this terrific song. I've listened to other songs by that band. I forget the name of the band. I didn't really like it, but I liked that song. It gave me happiness, a great happiness. But like I said, it's like this little happiness in just the moment, and you can catch it sometimes. And you're going to find that your life is sort of like spotted with these little happinesses along the way. But it's the great happinesses, the happinesses that come from striving towards great goals and pushing your limits. Those are the ones that define your life. Now, don't confuse distractions with happiness. That happens a lot. For instance, you're sitting there playing a video game for a few hours, right? And it's a distraction, and you feel, quote unquote, happy, but you're not really happy. You're just using the video game to distract yourself from the problems that you might be experiencing. And that is not happiness. Don't allow yourself to be confused by that. Think of those distractions like going to the casino. See, I've a time or two I've gone to the casino, and I've sat there at the blackjack table, and I'm playing and playing for hours and hours. A couple of times I played for days, literally on end, right? And it was just distracting me. Often as not, I've noticed retrospectively that I've gone to casinos and played for hours on end because my life was not particularly happy. And so I went to the casino and sat there and played, and at the time I was, quote unquote, happy. But it wasn't real happiness. It was just a distraction from the problems that I was having. See? Never make that mistake. It's very easy to make. It's very easy to make that mistake. And the way to distinguish between whether it's a distraction or if it's happiness is see if it's productive. See if it's expanding who you are, forcing you to grow, to push your own boundaries, your own limitations as a man. And see if the things that you are doing that is eating up your time is making you bigger. That's when you can spot the difference between a distraction and true happiness. Because, like, for instance, in the case of like video games and gambling, it's easy to see that's just a distraction. But sometimes you'll be at some job, and you'll think that you're advancing your career, but in fact you're not advancing your career, you're sort of stuck. And the days, you're just eating up the days as distraction. And yeah, you're drawing a salary, and you're performing your tasks at this job, and everything is hunky-dory, but you're not happy because you're not pushing yourself. And here's the key thing. You see, to my way of thinking, to be a man in full, to be a man who is just, somebody to respect and somebody who feels confident about his place in the world, you have to be pushing yourself. Because we are all born with great limitations, myself included. We are all born with enormous limitations, and what makes us men, what makes us to be respected, is how we push against these limitations and surpass them. And we see this in things, great and small. We see a small boy, learning to write his name, with some effort and not very well and not very neatly, but he's pushing against his limitations and learning to write his name. We see a young man, running the quarter mile, and he does it in a terrible time, and he tries and tries and practices and practices and tries to get better, and he does. Little by little, he improves his time, he runs faster, he pushes the boundaries, the limitations of who he is. And this is our goal as men, as a man. That's what you have to be striving towards. Pushing those boundaries, those God-given limitations that you have. Those limitations that make you merely a man. But by pushing against those limitations and expanding the scope of what you can achieve, you become a better man. And it's that pursuit, trying to be a better man, that is when you are truly happy.